The sun never set on the British Empire. For centuries, it ruled over lands across the globe, stretching from India to Africa, Australia to the Americas. But behind this grand empire was a story of ambition, struggle, and power. It all began with a small island nation, once just another European kingdom competing for influence. The rise of Britain was not overnight. It was built on war, trade, and colonization. By the 18th century, Britain had transformed into the most powerful empire in the world, controlling resources, people, and wealth like no other nation. But power always comes with a price. While Britain grew richer, its colonies suffered. Resistance, revolts, and the hunger for freedom started shaking the empire from within. One of the earliest turning points came in 1776, when America, Britain's prized colony, declared independence. This was a shock to the empire, a warning that control was not permanent. Still, Britain adapted. Instead of losing power, it redirected its ambitions towards India, Africa, and Southeast Asia. The Industrial Revolution further strengthened its grip, making Britain the world's factory. Railways, steamships, and telegraphs connected distant lands under British rule, allowing London to dictate policies thousands of miles away. But with great expansion came growing dissatisfaction. Locals in colonized nations began to resist foreign rule. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 was one such example. A sign that people would no longer accept being ruled by a distant monarchy. As the 20th century approached, Britain faced new challenges. The world was changing, and so was the way empires worked. Nationalism was rising, and people across the empire started demanding self-rule. But Britain was not ready to let go. It tightened its control, often using force to suppress movements. However, something even bigger was about to shake the world: the First World War. This war would test Britain's strength like never before, and set the stage for a new world order. The First World War was a turning point for the British Empire. Britain, along with its allies, emerged victorious. But the war left deep scars. Millions of soldiers had died, and the economy was struggling. The colonies had played a crucial role in Britain's victory. Indian, African, and Australian soldiers had fought on the front lines, believing that their sacrifices would earn them greater rights and freedom. But when the war ended, Britain's response was disappointing. Instead of granting more autonomy, the empire tightened its grip. This led to anger and resentment, especially in India, where movements like Mahatma Gandhi's nonviolent resistance started gaining momentum. Britain was now facing a new kind of enemy. Not foreign invaders, but internal rebellions demanding independence. While Britain was busy handling unrest in its colonies, another storm was brewing in Europe. The rise of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany dragged the world into another devastating conflict, World War II. This time, Britain was at the center of the fight. The empire once again relied on its colonies for soldiers and resources, promising freedom in return. The war drained Britain's economy even further, leaving it in massive debt. But more importantly, it exposed a harsh truth. The British Empire was no longer invincible. The illusion of power had been shattered. In 1947, Britain finally had to face reality. After years of struggle, India gained independence, marking the beginning of the empire's collapse. The loss of India sent a strong message to other colonies. If India could break free, so could they. Over the next few decades, the empire crumbled. One by one, African and Caribbean nations gained independence. The empire that once controlled a quarter of the world was now shrinking rapidly. But Britain wasn't ready to completely let go. To maintain some influence, it formed the Commonwealth, a group of former colonies that would remain loosely connected to Britain. However, this was not the same as having an empire. The world had changed, and Britain was no longer the superpower it once was. Yet, even as it adjusted to this new reality, another major shift was on the horizon: the European Union. As Britain adjusted to life after the empire, it faced a new challenge: its place in Europe. The Second World War had left the continent in ruins, and European nations realized that unity was the key to rebuilding. This led to the formation of the European Economic Community, EEC, in 1957, a group of 6 countries aiming for economic cooperation. At first, Britain hesitated to join, still clinging to its global identity rather than seeing itself as just another European nation. But as its economy struggled in the post-war years, the idea of joining the EEC became more appealing. After 2 failed attempts, blocked by France's President Charles de Gaulle, Britain was finally accepted in 1973. However, this decision would spark debates that would last for decades. Joining the EEC was supposed to boost Britain's economy, but not everyone was convinced it was the right move. Many saw it as a loss of sovereignty, arguing that British laws should not be influenced by European rules. This division was evident in the 1975 referendum, where the British people were asked if they wanted to stay in the EEC. The result was a strong yes, with 67% voting to remain. But the debate didn't end there. Over the years, Britain's relationship with Europe remained complicated, while other European nations moved towards deeper integration. Forming the European Union, EU, in 1993, Britain kept its distance, refusing to adopt the euro and demanding special treatment. This half-in, half-out approach created tensions, both within Britain and with the rest of Europe. By the 2000s, the EU had grown significantly, and so had the criticisms within Britain. Many believe that immigration policies, trade rules, and financial contributions to the EU were harming the UK rather than helping it. These concerns were amplified by politicians and the media, making the EU seem like an unwanted burden. In 2016, after years of debate and pressure, a referendum was held. The British people were asked once again, should the UK stay in the EU or leave? The results shocked the world. 52% voted for Brexit. Britain had made a historic decision to leave the European Union, setting the stage for one of the most controversial and chaotic political events in modern history. The Brexit vote in 2016 sent shockwaves across the UK and the world. For decades, Britain had been part of the European system, enjoying trade benefits and diplomatic influence. Now, it was choosing to walk away. The decision was deeply divisive. While some celebrated it as a victory for sovereignty, others feared economic instability and isolation. The problem was that no one had a clear plan for what leaving the EU would actually mean. Prime Minister David Cameron, who had promised the referendum, resigned immediately, leaving the country in political chaos. His successor, Theresa May, took on the difficult task of negotiating Brexit, but it quickly became clear that leaving the EU was far more complicated than anyone had imagined. The biggest issue was the deal. How could Britain leave the EU without damaging its economy and trade relationships? The EU was Britain's largest trading partner, and cutting ties overnight would be disastrous. Negotiations dragged on for years, with fierce debates in Parliament and among the public. Every proposal faced resistance. Some wanted a soft Brexit, where the UK would still keep close economic ties with the EU. Others demanded a hard Brexit, prioritizing full independence even if it meant economic risks. Meanwhile, businesses and ordinary citizens were left in confusion, unsure of how Brexit would affect jobs, prices, and travel. The division in Britain had never been stronger. By 2019, frustration had reached its peak. Theresa May failed to pass her Brexit deal and was forced to resign. Boris Johnson, a strong Brexit supporter, took over as Prime Minister with a bold promise. He would get Brexit done no matter what. After months of political battles, a new deal was finally agreed upon. On January 31st, 2020, Britain officially left the European Union. But leaving was just the beginning. The real challenge was ahead. Britain now had to redefine its future in a world where it was no longer part of the European system. Would Brexit bring the freedom and prosperity its supporters had promised? Or would it lead to the economic decline its critics had feared? After Brexit became official in 2020, the UK entered an uncertain period. Supporters of Brexit believed it was a fresh start, a chance to take control of laws, trade, and borders without interference from the EU. However, the immediate effects were far from smooth. Businesses struggled with new trade barriers, British exports to the EU faced delays, and industries that relied on European workers, such as agriculture and healthcare, found themselves short-staffed. The government tried to reassure the public, promising that the UK would thrive as an independent global power, but the reality was far more complicated. The country had to negotiate dozens of new trade deals, and many feared that Britain was becoming more isolated than independent. One of the biggest issues was Northern Ireland. The Brexit deal had created a special arrangement to prevent a hard border between Northern Ireland, part of the UK, and the Republic of Ireland, an EU member. But this led to new customs checks on goods moving between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, angering many. Some saw this as a betrayal, arguing that Brexit had weakened the Union instead of strengthening it. Political tensions rose, with calls for Irish reunification growing stronger. Meanwhile, Scotland, which had voted to stay in the EU, revived its push for independence, arguing that Brexit had changed the terms of its union with the UK. Instead of uniting the country, Brexit had deepened divisions. As the years passed, the UK faced new challenges. Economic struggles, inflation, and the impact of global crises like the COVID-19 pandemic. Some argued that Brexit had made these problems worse, while others insisted that the UK just needed more time to adjust. The country was now at a crossroads. Would it reinvent itself as a strong, independent nation, or would it regret its decision to leave the EU? Only time would tell. What was clear, however, was that Britain had undergone one of the most dramatic transformations in its history. From a global empire to an EU member, and now an independent but uncertain nation. The journey from empire to Brexit had come full circle, and the future remained unwritten. The history of the United Kingdom is a story of power, change, and adaptation. From ruling the world to redefining its place in it, the UK has constantly evolved, proving that no empire or political system is permanent. History teaches us that change is inevitable, and every decision, whether by a nation or an individual, shapes the future. The key is to learn from the past and move forward with wisdom.